How the Saints could draft LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. We are here after further review with Matt Moscona. Now listen to me, ladies and gentlemen, before I get your hopes up, or I guess before Matt gets your hopes up, I don't think this is a real scenario. In the title, it says actual scenario. I push back on that. I would call it a scenario. No, you know what I'm saying? I don't think there's any possible way we either move up to 3 or Jayden Daniels slips enough to where we could possibly draft him. But in the fairness of the draft season, I will listen. I will sit back, listen, react, review. Let's go ahead and get into the video.
NFL Combine's going on. The workouts are beginning today, and they carry through the weekend. It goes by position, as many of you may know that. But already they've done medicals and interviews and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's, as I've often said, the most important part of the Combine is the opportunity to have a team's doctors and medical staff do their own in-depth.
I mean, kind of, and it certainly depends on the player. Some players don't do medicals. Some players say we're not doing medicals, or they'll do medicals for like one team. But I'm not sure if that's the most important part. But
the evaluation of every prospect, and then also to sit down and have the interview to get to know the player that you might be investing large amounts of money in.
Yeah, that part's important.
So
for sure,
it caught a lot of people's attention when Jeff Ireland was speaking with Aaron Summers, who's the Saints team reporter there at NewOrleansSaints.com, and mentioned that the Saints are interviewing LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. And I think
this really shouldn't come as a surprise, so I saw this come through. I think teams, they're there. Teams in the top 14, they need to interview the 14, 15 prospects that they're interested in that are going to be there or could be there or will get drafted in that area, because you never know. You don't want to be in a situation where that you have a conversation on draft day, a trade is available, all of a sudden you move up, you're sitting there at like 7. I'm just making this up. You move up to like 7, but you haven't interviewed anyone in the top 7 because you weren't expecting it, right? So I think at least doing your due diligence, if you're there, if the process is available, go ahead and have those interviews. So I don't think it's indicative of the Saints' plan that they're interviewing Jayden Daniels. I don't think so at all.
I think that caught a lot of people's attention because most people assume Jayden is going to be off the board within the first 3 picks of the draft.
Yeah. Yes.
It's most likely that Caleb Williams will be the number 1 pick to the Bears.
He will be.
But you're certainly seeing a lot of mock drafts that are projecting Jayden number 2 to Washington.
I would say guaranteed he's going top 5. 100%. So the only scenario here, like the quote-unquote actual scenario, is somehow the Saints sneak into the top 5 of the NFL draft and go after Jayden Daniels, which would be such a pivot from what they've kind of told us they're planning to do.
If Drake May goes to Washington, Jayden, of course, could be the number 3 pick.
Yeah.
To New England. And if somehow he makes it past number 3, the conventional wisdom is that there would be a team that's a quarterback-needy team that would jump up and snag him. But
if he somehow goes, let's say he's sitting there at 5 or 6, somehow, which I don't think is possible, you're going to have teams like Denver, the Raiders, the Vikings. Teams are going to be flying up the draft board to try and go get him.
But as Jeff Ireland told Aaron Summers, quote, "It's part of doing our homework, as you can never be sure of what's going to happen in the draft," end quote.
Yeah, true.
And I thought about that, and he ain't wrong. And there's plenty of examples of it. I was thinking back to the last time the Saints nearly drafted a quarterback in round 1. Really. And it was 27.
The last 2, when I really thought they could possibly draft a quarterback in the first round, was the Patrick Mahomes year and the Lamar Jackson year. I think both of those years we were kind of right there on when do we take the heir apparent to Breeze. That window was kind of ending, and we were in a position where we could definitely make a move for them. We did not on either one. You never know how it would have played out. It's hard. Obviously now it's like, man, I wish I would have had one of those guys, but those are the 2 times where I thought it was really possible that we do this.
17, we all know the story, right? The Saints were sitting there at 11. Patrick Mahomes and Marshawn Lattimore were both on the board. Either way, the Saints knew, and look, Sean Payton's gone on the record with this. This isn't anything that I'm making up. Like, he's talked about this openly on the record. They had both those guys as highly rated players, the best player in the draft at their position. And so they were sitting there at 11 knowing that whatever happened at 10, they were getting one of those guys. Well, we know what happened. Kansas City leapfrogged the Saints and took Patrick Mahomes. The Saints took Lattimore one pick later. I went back today and looked at Mel Kiper's. I'm just using Mel, but I looked at Mel Kiper's final mock draft before the 2017 draft, just to show you how uncertain things can be. Myles Garrett went 1 to Cleveland. This was Mel Kiper's final mock draft. He had Jamal Adams 2 to the Niners. That was Solomon Thomas. And he had Solomon Thomas 3 to the Bears. Mitchell Trubisky went 3 to the Bears, if you remember.
Trubisky went 2 to
Leonard
the Bears,
Fournette
right?
4 to Jacksonville, which happened. And he had Marshawn Lattimore 5 to the Tennessee Titans from the Rams. So just as a, for instance, of what people thought.
Yeah, I mean, the mock drafts are never right. I mean, like, very rarely, especially the ESPN guys. Like, there are some guys. Walter Football is probably my favorite mock draft guy. I think he's been the most accurate. So he's a good starting point. But mock drafts are never right. And I try and not look at mock drafts, or I try not to take them too seriously. What I always say to do with mock drafts is look at like 3 or 4 of them and then see if there's a consensus of what position that team is taking. If, like in that example that Matt just showed, if 5 mock drafts all have the Niners taking a safety, it really doesn't matter what player it is, because you can assume, okay, they're probably going DB here. They're probably going safety here, right? So it's less about the player and it's more about the team philosophy. If you have 5 mock drafts and 5 different mock drafts have a team going quarterback, wide receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, then you can probably assume, like, all right, there's no telling. There's no telling what this team's going to do. So that's how I look at mock drafts, less about the player and more about the position.
Of Lattimore at that time, because it's been a while. Been a minute, but to remind you, he had Deshaun Watson 7 to the Chargers, McCaffrey 8 to Carolina, which happened. As for the Saints at 11, where they took Lattimore, check this out. Kiper had Derek Barnett, the defensive end from Tennessee, going to the Saints.
I loved Derek Barnett. I remember during this draft, I was a big fan of Derek Barnett, was hoping we could get a hold of him.
Trubisky going 12 to Cleveland, who was obviously already off the board. If you're wondering about the rest of the Saints draft, Kiper had the Saints. By the way, he had Ryan Ramczyk going 20 to the Broncos. But he picked, here it is. He had Mahomes. This is the last Mel Kiper's final mock draft before the 2017 draft. His final mock draft. Patrick Mahomes, who went 11, as we know. Went 10 to Kansas City. He had Patrick Mahomes going 25th overall to the.
Pretty wild for sure. But it just goes to show you, like, with some of these, like, and you also have to remember this, Mel Kiper is not a GM. He's not a roster builder. He's none of that. He's just kind of a forecaster. So how he views Patrick Mahomes is very different than how a Andy Reid views Patrick Mahomes. It's very different than how a Sean Payton views Patrick Mahomes. So his grades and how he foresees a player like Mahomes, you got to remember, Mahomes. We did a video on this recently. Mahomes came into this draft with a lot of like mystery, with a lot of mystique. He was a guy, kind of a gunslinger in Texas Tech, put up good numbers, but didn't really win games. You know, I mean, they don't really. He didn't come in with as much hype and pomp and circumstance as a Deshaun Watson. You know, Deshaun Watson was the guy who he won all these games. He was a winner. He beat Alabama. He put up these crazy numbers. And then you have Patrick Mahomes, who was just kind of more of a physical kind of prospect. So if you're Mel Kiper and Patrick Mahomes is your third quarterback, and one's got to drop, you know, depending on the team needs, and one's got to drop, you know, this is how it happens.
The Houston Texans.
But then you go to the Chiefs. The Chiefs may have had Patrick Mahomes as their number 1 quarterback. You never know. Obviously, the Bears had Mitchell Trubisky as their number 1 quarterback.
So to the point. Oh, by the way, with the 31st pick, you had the Saints taking Adoree Jackson out of USC. So the point is, yes, the draft comes and strange things can happen and it can be unpredictable. So you never know.
Oh, that's a good example right there. So Mel had the Saints taking Adderey Jackson, who I believe is a defensive back. So he had Derek Barnett going in the first round of the Saints, but defensive back was a need, and he had them going defensive back second. The Saints ended up going DB first. But that's a good example of like right church, wrong pew, where he had the need, he had the position correct, kind of gives you a philosophy of what the Saints want to do. He just had the player wrong.
That circumstance, right, where and the Saints had Mahomes as the number one quarterback in the draft, their number one quarterback in the draft. Kuiper didn't have Mahomes coming off the board till 25. That was the final mock draft. He goes 10 overall. Anyway, a couple of years ago, in 2022, for what it's worth, Kuiper did have the Saints at 16 taking Trevor Penning. That was a pretty popular pick at that point in mock drafts, and the Saints did.
I'm not going to lie. We're 5 minutes into this video. I have absolutely no idea how any of this is relevant to the scenario that the Saints could take Jayden Daniels. I mean, I'm kind of waiting for Jayden Daniels to be mentioned. I mean, he was mentioned, I guess, at the very beginning, and now we're just talking about mock drafts and draft order. The Patrick Mahomes situation is so far removed and so different from how the Jayden Daniels situation will play out. Jayden Daniels is not slipping to 13 or 14. He's not slipping to 10. So I need to hear less about how a player could fall or a mock draft could be wrong. And I need to hear more about how the Saints are going to move up. I need to hear more about what are the Saints going to trade? What's the package? And more importantly, let me go ahead and remind you this. Why would they do this? We have already filled out the answers to the questions of the quarterback position in New Orleans. Recap. Derek Carr had his contract restructured. Derek Carr is going to be the quarterback 100%, or at least on the roster, 100% the next 2 seasons. And if he's not on that in the season after those 2 seasons, it's a $50 million dead cap hit. Now, yeah, you can restructure moving forward, and who knows what's going to happen in 3 years, but the Saints are telling you Derek Carr is the quarterback. So if they draft Jayden Daniels, now, perfect world, yeah, I would love to have Jayden Daniels over Derek Carr. But I also live in a reality where Derek Carr has this giant contract. The Saints have restructured it. He's there. The Saints have told you what they're going to do. The Saints have laid out their plan. It's out in the open. It's public knowledge. A rookie quarterback doesn't fit there. A rookie quarterback doesn't fit that plan. It doesn't fit their contracts. It doesn't fit their financial structure. None of that fits. It fits in a year. It fits in 2 years where you drafted Jayden Daniels. He sits for a year behind Carr at the end of Carr's contract. Boom, he plays the next year, and then we're off to the races. So I need to hear about more of that and less about Mitchell Trubisky.
Take Trevor Penning at number 16. What's interesting is that what we know is the Saints would move up and take Chris Olave, but he had the Saints at 19 making the pick and taking Kenny Pickett out of Pitt. And then 1 pick later, the Steelers taking Malik Willis, the quarterback from Liberty.
Good example, again, of how mock drafts can misvalue quarterbacks. Mel Kiper's thinking these are quarterback-hungry teams, like Pittsburgh at the time, coming off of Ben Roethlisberger stuff. So he's thinking, okay, who are the best quarterbacks? This draft was very weak with the quarterbacks. This was the Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis draft. So Mel is kind of forcing this pick. Mel is saying, well, if Malik Willis is the second best quarterback on my board, he's got to go top 20. In reality, the NFL had them rated so low that they were third-round picks. So Mel is just forcing a quarterback to a quarterback-needy team because it's the NFL. And it seems like that's what would happen, right? It seems like a team would reach, get their quarterback, but the grades on those guys were so low that it didn't matter.
As you might remember, Malik Willis, who Mel Kiper had going 20th overall in that draft, didn't come off the board till round 3.
Yeah.
So yes, sometimes in the draft, all this to illustrate, sometimes in the draft, things happen that you don't expect. Listen, I don't think I would be stunned if Jayden Daniels is on the board at 14.
That's not going to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen. But what if you look at this draft as it plays out, and hypothetically, I mean, I don't know, but what happens if 1 and 2 are Caleb Williams, Drake May?
Absolutely could happen.
And at 3, New England decides we're not going to take a quarterback, and they take Marvin Harrison, just hypothetically.
Okay.
Or Joe Alt. I don't know. They don't go quarterback.
Sure.
And the Cardinals are there at 4, and they've already paid Kyler Murray. They're not taking a quarterback.
All right. Yep.
And the Chargers are at 5, and they've got Justin Herbert. They're not taking a quarterback.
Yep.
Would the Giants take a quarterback at 6?
Yes. The Giants 100% would take Jayden Daniels. This is, I mean, if his whole argument here is that there's a world where Jayden Daniels could slide, look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you right now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. That is not going to happen. The Giants would take him. The Broncos would take him. The Vikings would take him. The Falcons would probably take him. Like, all these teams would trade up and go get him. All these teams, aren't the Falcons at 8? I think the Falcons draft 8. So even if New England doesn't take him, there's a team at 6 who will take him. I mean, let's look at the draft board. So let's just pretend that Chicago, Washington, and New England pass. Arizona, probably not. Los Angeles, probably not. Giants, absolutely. Tennessee, probably not, but they'd think about it. Atlanta would. Chicago would already have their quarterback at this point. The Jets probably would. Minnesota probably would. Denver probably would. Los Angeles or Las Vegas would probably would. So even if he slips to 6, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams who would take Jayden Daniels. So how far could he actually slip? I would say 8. I would say if no one moved around, if strictly he's falling, I think Atlanta would probably be the team who takes him. Who just took him. And that's not even factoring in people moving up. Minnesota, Denver, Vegas, 100% would take him, and 100% would move up to take him. So I think 8 is the absolute floor for a Jayden Daniels fall. Now the question is, would the Saints in that situation, would the Saints be able to move from 14 to 7 or 14 to 8 to take him? And would their package be bigger, than the package from the Vikings or the Broncos or the Raiders? I doubt it.
Maybe, but they got Daniel Jones. The Titans have taken a quarterback in each of the last 2 drafts with Malik Willis and Will Levis.
Malik Willis doesn't count. He's a 3rd rounder. He's on the practice squad. He's not even going to make the team. He's not even going to be on the team in a year. And, like Daniel Jones, guys, I hate to besmirch somebody, but Daniel Jones is ass.
Are they going to pick another quarterback in the top 10? The Falcons at 8 would make a lot of sense. So I'm not telling you that Jayden gets down to 14, but is there a scenario where Jayden Daniels makes it to 8?
Probably not. Maybe. Like I just said, that's probably the floor. But bad news, we don't draft at 8. The Falcons draft at 8. So the Falcons are not a trade partner. You think the Falcons are going to let us trade up with them to get Jayden Daniels? We're in the same division. So we would have to trade to 7. The Falcons would know that's happening. And then the Falcons would probably try and trade up to get Jayden Daniels. This makes, it's crazy that the title says actual scenario, because this is not an actual scenario.
Sure. And the Bears pick 9th. So if Jayden's sitting there at 7 or 8, we know the Saints never stand pat. They're always looking to move up. Do you go up to 8 to get someone you think could be your franchise quarterback? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, if you didn't have Derek Carr. And that's not this scenario is not even taking into account. Could the Saints do it? Yeah, sure. They could. Of course, they can move up if they really wanted to. But the real question is, would the Saints? Does it make sense for the Saints to? And that's what I'm telling you. No, it doesn't. You're going to trade up to 7 to draft Jayden Daniels to have him sit behind Derek Carr for 2 years? That's not going to happen. That just does not happen in the NFL nowadays. Doesn't happen. Not going to happen. I know people want Jayden Daniels on the Saints. I would like Jayden Daniels on the Saints. Unfortunately, the timing is not there. The timing does not work. The timing is not correct. This is a conversation for a different player in 2 years, unfortunately. So we're just not the right dance partner. Right now, just our hopes and dreams and our plan and all that doesn't line up with the plan that Matt is laying out.
As Jeff Ireland said, you talk to Jayden Daniels is, quote, part of doing our homework, as you can never be sure of what's going to happen in the draft. Nobody 3 years ago thought, or 2 years ago, thought Malik Willis was going to last until round 3. But it's the draft, and sometimes things happen. So you dot your I's and you cross your T's, and you just make sure that it's going the way that it should.
I also think you got to factor in, like, some of these teams want the opportunity to talk to a player that could be the franchise quarterback of a team they're playing for the next however many years. If Ireland thinks maybe Daniels goes to Atlanta and that we have a chance to pick his brain, we have a chance to kind of see how he operates, and he could be a division rival for the next decade, I'll take that opportunity. Again, what are they doing? Like, they're sitting there. They're at the combine. If you're at the combine and you have a chance to talk to Jayden Daniels or Caleb Williams or Drake May or whoever, talk to him. But I don't think Ireland or anybody in the front office sees a opportunity to get Jayden Daniels unless Jayden Daniels falls to 14, which is not happening.
And if there's an opportunity to get aggressive, make a move, and maybe draft your franchise quarterback, and perhaps it's Jayden Daniels, awesome. Now I would put that at about a 3% likelihood. But in the possibility that it could happen, yeah, do your due diligence. Check all the boxes and see what happens on draft day. Maybe the Saints give us all a very pleasant surprise. Hey.
Wow. Okay. Not an actual scenario. Kind of shocking, TBH. But I guess up there in Baton Rouge, they got to talk about something, ladies and gentlemen. They're not the content factory we are down here. Ladies and gentlemen, go down below. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Is there any chance at all that you see Jayden Daniels coming to the Saints at 14? Or do you really think the Saints would move up to take Jayden Daniels? Let me know in them comments. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.